For more than 200 years, nothing had ever happened at Farwatch Station, and the beings who served there had built their whole understanding of the universe around that fact. It sat at the far lip of the sable expanse, a lonely ring of metal and light strung between the last charted stars and the dark that no one bothered to chart. The assembly had raised it centuries ago to watch that dark, and the dark had rewarded them with drifting stone, dead comets, and the slow, indifferent turning of suns. Officers were posted there when their careers had stalled and someone wanted them out of the way. They called it the quiet grave. They joked about it in the mess hall. They stopped watching the deep array the way a guard stops watching a door that has never once opened. Junior Officer Sennel was half asleep at his console when the door opened. He was young, only just growing into the second pair of eyes that his kind, the Varl, developed at maturity, and the new eyes still ached in the low light. The deep array chimed. He almost silenced it without looking. Then he looked, and the reading on the screen was a color he had never seen the system produce. Not the red of danger, not the amber of caution. A deep, cold violet, the shade the machine reserved for things it did not have a name for. Sennel sat up very slowly. "That cannot be right," he murmured, and tapped the console with one long finger, and ran the scan again. The numbers came back the same. Something enormous had crossed into the outer edge of the expanse. It was moving at a speed that should have peeled apart any hull the assembly's science had ever certified, and it was not slowing along any curve his instruments understood. It had not decelerated. It had simply stopped, the way a thought stops, as if the space around it had quietly agreed to make room, and then closed again behind it. He called his supervisor. His supervisor called the watch officer. Within the hour, every screen on Farwatch was locked on a single shape that grew sharper with each pass of the array, and no one on the station was joking anymore. It was a ship. That much was certain. The size of it was not a thing the mind wanted to accept. The first clean measurement placed it at over 38 kilometers from bow to stern, a scale no known species had ever built and kept working. The Varl had tried once, generations back, to raise a warship half that length, and the attempt had drained 3 star systems dry before they gave it up as madness. The Draska, whose fleet was the terror of this whole region, whose largest capital ship was the pride of their entire war culture, measured barely 5 kilometers stem to stern. And here was something nearly 8 times that, resting at the border like a mountain that had decided to sit down and wait. Chief Warden Seth Ravune came onto the observation deck without being called. She was old for a Varl, old enough to remember when Farwatch had felt like an insult and not a duty, and she had spent a long career studying dangers that never arrived. She stood at the main port with her hands folded behind her back, and her 4 eyes did not blink for a long time. "Run a composition read on the hull," she said quietly. "I want to know what it is made of." The read took longer than it should have. When the results came back, the technician made a small sound in his throat. Something caught between a laugh and a gasp. "Warden, the outer plating does not match anything on record. It is swallowing almost all of our scanning frequencies. We are only getting fragments. What little comes back suggests a layered composite, something with the density of collapsed matter, but nothing like the mass that should carry. It should not be possible to move something that dense at the speeds we logged." "And yet it moved," Sethra said. She turned to the communications officer. "Anything from the vessel? Any signal at all?" "Nothing, Warden." "It is silent. No hail, no beacon. Nothing on any band we listen to." She felt then a thing she had not felt in decades of comfortable service. It was not the mild worry of a budget dispute or a border complaint. It was fear, the true kind, the kind that set all 4 of her hearts beating faster than she liked. She had built a career on threats that stayed theoretical. Now one had come, and it was silent and patient and larger than anything her people had ever dared to imagine building. "Send the full report to Assembly Command," she said. "Highest priority. Classify it as a first contact event." She paused, and the next words tasted strange. "Titan-class threat." The technician looked at her. Titan-class was not a real category. It was a shelf in an old defense manual, a name that cautious analysts had written down long ago, in case the day ever came when they needed it. No one had expected to reach for it. No one had expected the day to come at all. That was the first day. Word moved through assembly space faster than any official channel could hold it. Within 2 days, every world with a seat had the raw sensor data. Within 3, an emergency session had been called, the first in over a century, and the great circular chamber on the neutral world of Coradine, filled with delegates from more than 50 worlds, their translator implants humming softly as they waited, their fear thick enough to taste. Coradine had been chosen for the assembly seat long ago, precisely because it belonged to no one. On any ordinary day, the chamber held argument, ceremony, the slow grind of 100 species learning to share a galaxy. This was not an ordinary day. The tiered seats were full to the walls. Aides who normally spoke for their masters found their masters had come in person. At the center dais stood the speaker, a tall insectoid being of the Isk, named Thessa Cole, and she raised one forearm for order and waited a long while before the murmuring died. "We are gathered," she began, her voice carried to every ear in the room, because of an event none of us prepared for. 3 days ago, at Farwatch Station, our sensors recorded the arrival of a vessel of a size and origin we cannot explain.
I will show you what our science division has given me, and then I will ask you to help me decide what we do.
A hologram opened above the floor, and the whole chamber saw the shape at once, rendered to true scale against the stars with the little icons of assembly warships set beside it for comparison. The warships looked like insects on the flank of a whale. Even delegates, who had studied the reports for 2 days, made small, involuntary sounds. "This vessel measures roughly 38 kilometers, Thessa Cole said. "Its hull resists our scans. What we can read suggests defenses beyond anything any member of this assembly has ever fielded. It has made no hostile move. It has sent no word. It arrived, and it has not moved since." A Draska delegate rose, 4-legged frame, lifting to its full aggressive height. His name was Grozan, and his translator carried a tone that was trying very hard not to be panic and failing. "Speaker, with respect, this is the exact scenario our defense packs were written for. We must mobilize the combined fleet now. If that ship is a first strike weapon from an unknown power, every hour we wait is an hour we hand to an enemy." Sounds of agreement rolled up from several tiers. "Not all." An elder of the Lumen Fellowship, a people known across the region for centuries of refusing violence, rose next, slow and gray. "And if we fire on a ship that has done nothing but arrive quietly at our door," said Elder Miralon, "what do we tell the power that built it? We would be starting a war with hands capable of shaping that. Has anyone in this room asked what such hands could do to us in answer?" The chamber came apart into overlapping voices. Some wanted the fleet in the void by nightfall. Some begged for patience. A few simply sat, unable to fit the scale of the thing into any thought they owned. It was Sethra Vune, brought to Coradine to give the station's account, who found herself waved to a lower microphone and who said, the thing that no one thanked her for. "I have watched this vessel for 3 days, she said. "I have thrown every sensor I own at it, and it has let me learn almost nothing, and I want this assembly to sit with that. A thing that wished us harm would not need to wait. It is not waiting because it is weak. It is waiting because it is choosing to."
I would be very careful about being the one who takes that choice away from it.
Grozan's mandibles clicked. "The Warden counsels us to do nothing while a mountain sits on our threshold." "The Warden," Sethra said, "counsels you not to throw the first stone at something you cannot even see clearly." She sat. The hawks had already turned away from her before she finished. She had said her warning, and the room had folded it up and set it aside, the way rooms like that always do. And she carried that small, cold certainty with her for a long time afterward, that she had spoken and been heard and been ignored, all in the same breath. Speaker, Thessa Cole, raised her arms again, and when the noise finally settled, she spoke carefully. And what she said changed the shape of the room. "Before this assembly decides anything," she said, "there is a thing you all need to know. This is not the first time our science has recorded a hull that reads like this one. The chamber went still. "Explain," said Grozan. The hologram shifted. The great ship vanished, replaced by old grainy sensor data, its timestamp decades deep. A small vessel hung in the image now, sleek and modest, no larger than a common assembly cruiser. 58 years ago, Thessa Cole said, a scout ship from a species then unknown to us drifted, crippled, into the outer edge of the Calyx sector. Its crew were nearly dead. Our records describe a long, brutal passage through hostile space. A patrol recovered the survivors. They called themselves human. A ripple of recognition moved through the older delegates. A few of them remembered. It had been a footnote at the time, a minor entry in a minor file. Our diplomatic corps assessed them, she went on, as a young species, struggling, technologically behind most of this body, fractured by their own wars. We granted them observer status, filed them at the lowest priority, and left them alone. Their homeworld was placed inside a standard non-interference boundary, as we do with any developing world. And this assembly has thought of them, when it has thought of them at all, as small, weak, a footnote easily overlooked. "What does an old footnote have to do with the thing at Farwatch?" asked Elder Miralun. Thessa Cole let the question hang. "Our science ran a comparison," she said, "between the hull data we took from that crippled scout 58 years ago and the fragments we have pulled from the Titan-class vessel now sitting at our border." She paused. The molecular signatures matched to 91%. The silence that followed had weight. You could feel every delegate doing the same arithmetic and hating the answer. "You are telling us," Grozan said slowly, "that this was built by the same people we filed as primitive." "I am telling you what the data says." "Yes." For a long moment no one spoke. A species this body had dismissed as unimportant, barely half a century ago, had in that half-century learned to build something 38 kilometers long, with a skin their finest instruments could not read. "How?" Elder Miralun said, at last, and her voice was very quiet. "Does a people go from what you have described to that? In 58 years. No one in that chamber had an answer. "There is a mistake in the reading," Grozan said. But he said it the way a being says a thing he has already stopped believing. 91% is not certainty. Hulls share alloys. Two Smiths a galaxy apart might strike on the same good design. Two Smiths a galaxy apart do not both stumble onto a plating that eats our sensors whole, said Vesic, the Keth delegate, without rising. He had the look of someone running numbers behind his eyes and disliking every total. "I move goods for a living, delegate. I know what it means when a supplier who could barely keep the lights lit turns up, a few years on, moving more tonnage than my whole species can lift. It means they found something, or something found them. Either way, they are not the supplier you filed." "They are not a supplier at all," said Elder Miralun quietly. "They are a people we pitied." "I sat in this chamber, younger then, when the vote was taken to grant them, observer standing. I remember the words we used. Charming, someone said. Resilient, for their level. We meant it kindly, and we meant it the way you are kind to a thing you have already decided is beneath you." She folded her gray hands. "I would give a great deal now to have been kinder in a way that cost us more attention." The chamber sat with that, and the fear in it changed flavor. From the clean, bright fear of a weapon at the door, to something slower and more uncomfortable. The fear of having been wrong about something for a very long time, and only now feeling the floor of it give way. Out at Farwatch, the second day passed, and then the third, and the great ship did not move. Its silence grew heavier the longer it lasted. Seth Ravune had barely slept since the violet reading first climbed her screen, and she stood the watch with her eyes red-rimmed, running scan after scan on a hull that gave her nothing, counting the days without meaning to. The first day, the second, the third. On the fourth day, the silence broke. A single clear signal came through on every open channel at once, in a voice that was calm and level, and the station's translators processed it almost before the crew could brace for it. "This is Captain Mira Halloran of the vessel Undaunted, speaking for the Terran Vanguard fleet. We have been aware of your station since we arrived, and we have been listening to your channels the whole while. We mean you no harm. We ask for a formal audience with your governing body whenever it suits them. We can wait as long as they need." The message ran through twice more and went quiet. Seth Ravune stood frozen at the console for a long breath. Then she reached for the comm with a hand that would not hold quite steady. "Get me assembly command," she said. "Now, tell them the humans have spoken." Across Farwatch, officers stopped whatever they were doing and stared at the shape hanging silent against the stars. It had not moved. It had not fired. For 4 days it had simply waited, patient as stone, until the hour it chose to speak. And in that moment the crew of the Quiet Grave understood, all at once, that the universe they had built their careers on, the one where nothing ever happened here, was gone. And it was not coming back. The signal reached Corridine within hours, and Thessacol called the assembly back into session. And this time, not one seat stood empty. 4 hours ago, she told them, the vessel called Undaunted asked, formally, to speak with this body. It broadcast the request openly, on every band in a form our translators handled without effort. That tells us something. Either the humans hold translation technology that matches our own, or they have studied us closely enough to build one only for this purpose. Neither of those is a comfortable thought. "They wish to talk," said Grozan, arms folded across his broad chest. "A ship that size does not need to ask for anything. It takes..." A delegate of the Keth rose then, a small, quick-moving being whose people lived by trade and logistics, and whose voice carried the careful weight of someone who had spent a lifetime reading the true shape of a deal. His name was Vesic. "Speaker, we are looking at this from the wrong end," he said. "This is not a bargain between equals where we hold anything back in reserve. A ship 38 kilometers long is at our door. If they wanted us dead, waiting for an audience would be a strange way to go about it. So I ask a plainer question. What does a power like that gain by being polite?"
And the only answer I can find is that it wants something politeness can buy, that force cannot.
A seat, perhaps, standing. To be met as someone rather than taken as something. The room turned that over. It was a strange idea to hold. A people who had gone from crippled scouts to city-length warships in a lifetime, and who chose to knock instead of kick the door in. "There is one more possibility," said a quiet voice from the highest tier. Every head turned. It was the Scythian who had spoken, a reclusive folk who rarely came to session, who kept records across spans of history that made the assembly itself look young. Their elder, a being called Scythos, rose with slow and deliberate care. "We hold accounts," Scythos said. "Older than most of you. No, we keep, and in them we find a pattern we have seen before, though never at this size. A people that endures a long stretch of true hardship, isolation, or a threat to their very existence, will sometimes emerge from it changed all the way through. Not only in their machines, in their spirit.
Such a people often builds enormous power to defend with, not because they mean to conquer, but because suffering has taught them a lesson they will never unlearn.
That safety is not a thing you are handed. It is a thing you build, or you die. You believe the humans suffered something," Thessacol said. "I believe," Scythos answered, "that no one builds a thing like Undaunted to look at. Something drove them to it. The question this body keeps asking, whether the humans are dangerous, is a foolish question. Of course they are dangerous.
The question worth asking is what made them so, and whether that danger now points at us, or whether we are only standing downstream of something far larger than our own small quarrels."
The chamber was quiet a long while. Then the speaker nodded slowly. "Then let us find out," she said. "I propose we grant the audience. We invite Captain Halloran and a small party to Corridine, under our protection, to speak to us directly." The vote was not clean. Grozan and others pressed hard for a show of force instead, insisting that meeting the humans on human terms would read as weakness. But when the count came in, The majority chose to talk, because fear, once it grows large enough, more often argues for caution than for the first blow. The answer from Undaunted came within minutes. Audience accepted. Captain Halloran would come to Coradine inside 2 standard days aboard a shuttle. They asked only 2 things: that their ship be left where it stood, and that no further attempt be made to scan or approach it for the safety of assembly personnel. That last line unsettled everyone who read it. It was not a threat, not exactly. It carried the weight of a people who knew precisely what scans had already been tried and who wanted them stopped. Out at Farwatch, Seth Ravune read the message 3 times before she set it down. For the safety of your personnel. She thought of the deep probes her team had run across 4 days, pushing every instrument they had into that unreadable hull, hunting for a seam. She thought about it for a long, cold moment, and then she gave the order to halt all active scanning of the Undaunted at once, and she did not let herself finish the thought about what might have happened if she had pushed a little harder. 2 days later, a small craft detached from the underside of the great ship and began its slow fall toward Coradine. Against its parent it looked almost fragile, a dark and modest thing no larger than an ordinary transport, and it moved with a smooth control that quieted even the most skeptical flight officers watching it come in. Security around Coradine had been raised 10-fold. Warships from a dozen worlds hung in careful formation, a show of unity that everyone privately understood would mean nothing at all if the humans had come to fight. Ground troops lined the capital. The whole apparatus of a frightened assembly stood ready to do exactly nothing useful. The shuttle set down in the open plaza before the chamber, precisely on time, watched by 1,000 lenses and countless anxious eyes. For a moment nothing happened. The craft simply sat, its surface faintly alive with some field none of them could name. Then a hatch parted, a ramp slid down, and a single figure stepped out into the light. She was smaller than most of them had let themselves expect. She stood perhaps a head below the average Varl and barely reached the shoulder of the Draska honor guard posted at the plaza's edge. She wore a plain dock uniform. She carried no weapon anyone could see. She came down the ramp at an unhurried pace, taking in the ring of warships overhead and the wall of frightened faces below with an expression that was almost gentle. 2 more humans followed, dressed as she was, calm as she was, though they moved with the still alertness of soldiers rather than envoys. And that, more than the size of the ship, was what put a chill in the delegates who watched. They had braced for arrogance. They had braced for a conqueror's swagger. They had not braced for calm. There is a particular fear that a quiet, certain thing wakes in you when you know that it could hurt you and simply is not choosing to, and the plaza filled with that fear as the small woman crossed it. She stopped a short way from the ramp and looked around at all of it. The drones, the guns, the distant warships, the shaking junior diplomat sent to receive her. "I am Captain Mira Halloran," she said, her voice steady and clear. "Thank you for agreeing to meet. I know our arrival has cost you sleep, and I am sorry for that. It was never what we wanted." The diplomat, a young Isk who had clearly drawn the shortest possible assignment, managed a trembling welcome. Halloran answered with a small dip of the head, a human gesture that meant nothing to almost everyone present, and yet somehow eased a few of them anyway. And then she walked toward the chamber flanked by her 2 silent companions, and high above the world, the Undaunted held its place at the edge of the system. 38 kilometers of quiet, patient power, waiting to learn how its captain would be received. Inside, the tension was almost more than the room could hold. Every seat was taken. Every delegate watched the great doors. When they opened and Mira Halloran walked in, a hush dropped over the whole hall like a lid. To most of the beings assembled, she looked remarkably ordinary. No armor, no weapon, no column of guards beyond the 2 quiet figures who took up station behind her. She could have passed, on appearance alone, for a minor envoy from a minor world. And every being in that chamber knew, with a certainty that sat in the base of the skull, that this small, calm woman spoke for a power that dwarfed everything the combined assembly could put into the void. Thessakol, rose to greet her, forearms folded in the old gesture of welcome. Captain Halloran, on behalf of the Assembly of Sovereign Worlds, I welcome you to Coradine. We are eager to understand why you have come. Thank you, Speaker, Halloran said. I understand the fear my ship has caused, and I would like to speak to it directly, if the Assembly will allow me. Thessa Cole gestured to the dais. This body is listening. Halloran stepped up onto the raised platform at the center of the floor, where every delegate could see her. And she paused there a moment, looking out over the sea of alien faces, some hostile, some curious, most simply afraid. 58 years ago, she said, a small scout ship from Earth drifted into your space, broken and dying. Your people found the survivors and kept them alive. You looked at us and you saw a young species, weak, fractured, unimportant, and you left us alone.
Before I say anything else, I want you to know that we have never once forgotten that kindness, and I want you to know that your assessment was correct.
At the time, it was exactly right. She let that settle. A great deal has changed since then, she said. I think it is time this body understood why. The chamber did not move, she went on, and her voice, which had been steady, took on something quieter and older. When your patrol found that scout, Earth was in trouble. Not from anything outside.
From ourselves. We had spent nearly all of our history at each other's throats, over ground, over resources, over things that feel very small now and felt enormous then.
We had only just begun to reach past our own star. And we were doing it while still bleeding from wars that had almost finished us. She paused. Then, about 40 years ago, we found something in the dark, past the edge of our system. It was moving toward us. It was not one of your ships. It was not anything we recognized, and our best minds studied it for months and could not name its origin. All we knew was that it was vast, and it was fast, and it was coming. A murmur ran the tears. Thessa Cole lifted a hand, and it stilled. We called it the Hollowing, Halloran said. For 9 years we watched it close, and we could not stop it, and we could not even understand it. Our governments, which had spent generations fighting one another, were forced to stand together for the first time in the whole long story of our kind. Not because we wanted to, because there was no version of surviving that did not begin with it. And what was it? Elder Miralyn asked. So quietly she seemed almost to have surprised herself. Halloran's gaze went distant for a moment. We still do not fully know, she said. When it reached the edge of our system, it did not speak. It did not slow. It began to consume everything it touched. Rock, ice, the small moons first. Then it turned toward our outer colonies. We lost a mining settlement called Harrow's Reach before we truly understood what we were facing. It was not a ship, not the way you or I would mean the word. It was something that treated matter itself as fuel, and it was never full. The chamber was dead silent now. The earlier fear, the earlier hostility, had drained out of the room and left something closer to horror in its place. We fought it for 7 years, Halloran said. Everything we had, every weapon, every strategy. Nothing worked, not at first. We lost cities, we lost fleets, we lost millions of lives buying time for people in laboratories to find a seam in a thing that had none. And in the end, we found one. Not through glory, through stubbornness, and through the fact that humans, as it turns out, do not know how to stop, even when stopping is the sensible thing, even when stopping would spare us. A faint, joyless something crossed her face, not quite a smile. We built the first ship of the Bulwark class not to conquer anyone, she said. We built it as a wall, large enough, strong enough, that nothing like the Hollowing could ever come for us again. Without a fight, it might not win. Undaunted is the 11th ship of that class.
We built her and her sisters because we learned the hardest way people can learn a thing, that safety is not given to you.
You build it with your own hands or you go into the dark. Scythos, the Scythian elder, rose slowly from his high seat. You said you defeated this Hollowing, he said. How? Halloran's expression grew more careful. That is a harder thing to say simply, she said. We learned it answered to certain frequencies, certain shapes of directed energy, in ways that disrupted whatever it used to consume. It took years, and more dead than I will name in this room, to find that and to build weapons that could use it. We did not destroy it in the end. We drove it off, badly wounded, back into the deep. We do not know if it will come again.
That not knowing is a large part of why we build the way we build now.
How many? Elder Miralyn asked. You keep saying millions. I want to understand the shape of the word. My people count our dead by name. We read them aloud, each one, in a hall built for it. How large a hall would you need? Something crossed Halloran's face, and for a moment the calm thinned. Not into grief exactly, but into the flat, careful place a person goes to keep grief from spilling. We stopped reading the names in the 4th year, she said, not from disrespect. There was no longer time to read them and fight at the same time, and if we did not fight, there would be no one left to remember them. So we built a wall on our home world instead, one long face of dark stone, and we cut into it a single line, and the line has no names on it at all.
It only says that they were ours and that we could not save them, and that we would build so that the next generation would never have to make that same trade.
Our children touch it on the way to school. That is how they learn what the ships are for. She let a breath go. You asked how large a hall? Elder, we could not build a hall large enough. That is the answer. We built a fleet instead. The Lumen Elder inclined her head slowly, and did not ask again. You speak of it as a thing that thought, said Scythos. You said it turned toward your colonies. A rock that eats does not turn toward. It only falls where the mass pulls it. I know, Halloran said. I have spent 40 years wishing I did not. She let the words sit. It turned, Elder. When we hit our outer stations behind a moon, it came around the moon. When we ran silent, it found us anyway. We do not say in front of our own people that it chose. It is not a word that helps anyone sleep.
But you ask me a true question in a room of people I will likely never see again, so I will give you a true answer.
We do not think it was only falling, and that, more than its size, is the thing that made us build. The chamber tried to hold the size of it. An enemy that ate moons. A war of 7 years and millions of dead. A whole people forced to unite or perish. It was almost too much to fit inside a single mind, and yet looking at the calm and steady woman on the dais, not one of them doubted a single word. Why? Grozan said at last, and the hostility had gone out of him, replaced by something more wary. Why tell us none of this until now? Why arrive without warning in a ship like that? Halloran turned to face him directly. We argued that question for a long time, she said. The truth is that we were not ready to reach out again until now. After the hollowing, Earth spent decades rebuilding and preparing in case it returned, or in case something like it was already out here. And we did not want to come back to you as the frightened, broken thing you met 58 years ago. We wanted to come back as something that could stand on its own feet, so that whatever grew between us would grow out of respect and not out of pity. And the size of the ship, Thessa Cole said, carefully, was that truly needed for a conversation? Halloran considered it and answered plainly. Undaunted is not a diplomatic vessel, speaker. She is a wall, built for a war. We pray never comes again.
I chose to arrive aboard her instead of something smaller, because I did not want to explain
the hollowing to you in words alone. Words are cheap, and this body has heard many of them. I wanted your own instruments to show you the scale of what it takes to survive a thing like that. I believe that if you saw it, the danger would become real to you in a way I could never argue you into. A long quiet followed. The fear in the room had not vanished. It had changed shape, cooled into something closer to a tired, sober respect. There is one more reason we came, Halloran said, and the room tensed again. We came to warn you. Warn us of what? Thessa Cole said. The hollowing came from somewhere, Halloran said. We never fixed its origin, but we traced its path backward as far as the wreckage led us. And the line runs through this region. It may have passed near your worlds long ago, before any of you were born to see it. It may turn back this way in 100 years, or 1,000, or never. We do not know if there are more of them. We came to give you what little we learned, and to offer whatever help we can, if a thing like that ever comes for your homes the way it came for ours." The weight of it dropped over the chamber, like something with mass. A session that had opened in terror of the humans themselves had turned, in the span of one plain speech, into something far worse. The understanding that a horror capable of eating moons might drift somewhere inside their own stretch of the dark, and that the small people they had once filed and forgotten might be the only ones alive with any real experience of fighting it. Thessa Cole was silent a long moment before she found her voice. "Captain Halloran, this assembly owes you a debt for your honesty and for the warning you have carried to us. I believe I speak for many when I say our fear was born of a failure to understand what stood in front of us. I hope this session is the beginning of a very different thing between our peoples." Halloran inclined her head. "That is exactly what we hoped for." And it was in that moment, with the room finally leaning towards something like peace, that the great doors at the back of the chamber slammed open, and a Draska military officer strode in, his posture tight with alarm. He crossed quickly to Grozan and spoke low and fast into the delegate's ear. Grozan's expression shifted from surprise to something colder. He rose. "Speaker, forgive the interruption." His voice had gone tight. "I have word from our fleet near Farwatch. One of our patrol ships, acting without authority, has moved to intercept the human vessel. They are attempting a forced boarding." Every eye in the chamber turned to Mira Halloran. Her expression did not change. She did not look frightened or angry or even much surprised. She only turned toward Grozan with a calm, level gaze. "I would very strongly advise your officers to stand down," she said, quietly. "For their own sake." The chamber held its breath. Out at Farwatch, the trouble had been building for hours before anyone in the chamber knew of it. The Draska cruiser, a mid-weight ship named Skarn's Honor, had been posted near the station as part of the swollen security screen, and her commander was a proud, decisive Draska named Kavral Dune. Dune had built his whole reputation on acting while others talked, and he had spent days watching the human ship sit silent at the border while his own government debated and bowed and negotiated. And it offended everything he believed about strength. He did not trust conversation. He trusted force answered with force. And when word reached him that Captain Halloran had left the Undaunted for the chamber, taking the ship's mind away from its body, he saw, or thought he saw, an opening. "Hail the vessel," he ordered from his bridge, without authorization from anyone. "Standard boarding protocol. Inform them we require inspection access under assembly security regulation. Given an unidentified ship in monitored space." His communications officer, a nervous young Draska named Yenko, hesitated. "Commander, this was not in the approved plan." "Should we not wait for orders?" "I did not ask for debate, Lieutenant." "Send it." The hail went out. Nothing answered from the Undaunted. Dune's jaw set. "Bring us closer." Into boarding range. Skarn's Honor, quick and sharp for a Draska ship, began her slow approach toward the mountain of hull ahead. Against the Undaunted, she looked almost absurd. A single darting thing crawling toward a sleeping range of stone. Dune felt no fear as the distance closed. His weapons were live, his boarding pods ready, and he told himself the humans would see reason once they were looking down the throat of assembly resolve. The bridge did not share his confidence. Yenko watched the range close on his display and felt his throat go dry. The human ship did nothing. That was the part that unnerved him, and he could not make his commander see it. A vessel that meant to fight would be doing something as they closed. Charging weapons, shifting shields, turning to bring a broadside to bear. Anything. The Undaunted did none of it. It hung there exactly as it had hung for days, and its stillness was not the stillness of a thing that had not noticed them. It was the stillness of a thing that had noticed, and weighed them, and decided they were not worth the trouble of moving for. Yenko had hunted animals as a young Draska on the cold plains of his homeworld. He knew the difference between the stillness of prey and the stillness of a predator that has already decided it is not hungry yet. He was looking at the second kind now, and every instinct his species had carried up out of its own long climb was telling him to turn the ship around. "Commander," he tried. "One last time. It is not reacting. Ships react. It is not reacting at all. Because there is no one home to give the order," Dune said. "Their captain is a system away, playing at diplomacy." "That is the whole point, Lieutenant. Close the distance." Yenko closed the distance. His hands did the work, his instincts screamed against, because the chain of command is a thing bred into the Draska, as deep as the hunt. And he watched the range counter fall, and the great dark cliff of Hull grew in the forward port until it filled the whole of it, and then filled more than the whole of it, until there was no starfield left. Only the endless flank of the thing they had come to board, close enough now that he could see it was not smooth at all, but layered and seamed and scarred, an object that had clearly been somewhere and come back. He was wrong. So was his commander, as Skarn's honor crossed a line roughly 8 kilometers from the Undaunted's hull. Every system aboard the Draska cruiser went dark at the same instant. Lights failed, weapons powered down, the engines cut out entirely, and the ship went from a war footing to a drifting hull in the space of a single breath, her crew thrown into sudden and total silence. "What is happening?" Dune shouted, gripping the arms of his chair as weak emergency light flickered up from some backup that had, apparently, been permitted to live. "Commander," Yenko said, his voice shaking, "everything is offline. Weapons, engines, shields, all of it. There was no impact, no weapons fire. It is as though something simply reached in and turned us off." A new voice came through the ship's calm and even, cutting clean through the panic on the bridge. "This is Undaunted, speaking under Captain Halloran's standing orders. Your vessel entered a restricted zone with weapons live and boarding gear active, following an approach no one authorized. Your systems have been suspended as a precaution. No harm has come to your crew. Please stay calm." Dune stared at the speaker, humiliation and fear at war across his face. "Restore our systems at once. This is an act of aggression against an assembly vessel. Your vessel approached with hostile intent and moved to board a foreign diplomatic escort without authority." The voice replied, still calm, still even. "Your systems will be returned to you once you have withdrawn to a safe distance and stood down your weapons." "This is not a negotiation, Commander Dune. It is a courtesy." The use of his name, spoken with that quiet certainty, put a cold into Kavral Dune that he would carry for the rest of his life. They had known exactly who he was before he ever announced himself. They had known, and they had let him come, and they had switched him off like a lamp, and they had not hurt a single one of his people while they did it. Back in the chamber, word of the confrontation spread from delegate to delegate in urgent whispers, while officials scrambled for details. Mira Halloran stood at the dais through all of it, her expression unchanged, glancing now and then at a small device on her wrist that showed her something no one else could see. "Captain Halloran," Thessa Cole said, her voice tight with the effort of holding it steady. "What is happening to our ship?" "Nothing lasting, Speaker," Halloran said. "Undaunted detected an unauthorized approach with weapons live and boarding gear active. She suspended the offending vessel's systems as she is instructed to. No one has been harmed. I would ask this body to order Commander Dune to withdraw. When he does, his ship will be returned to him whole." "You disabled a warship without firing a shot," said Vesic, the Keth delegate, more to himself than to anyone, and there was a note in his voice, under the tension, that was almost awe. "We prefer not to make a situation worse when it can be ended without it," Halloran said simply. "But I want this body to be clear. Undaunted will defend herself and her people if she is threatened. That protection reaches to any of your personnel who happen to be aboard her. None were harmed today. None will be, as long as no one reaches for us first." Grozen, pale and visibly shaken, was already speaking low and fast into a calm, relaying the order back to his fleet. Within minutes, confirmation came. Skarn's honor had begun to withdraw, her systems flickering back to life as she pulled away, exactly as the calm voice had promised. Cavril Dune would be relieved of command within the day, quietly disgraced by an assembly desperate to forget the whole affair. But in the chamber, the immediate crisis passed, and left behind it a heavy, thoughtful quiet. "I apologize," Thessacol said finally, "for the actions of one of our officers. His conduct does not speak for this body." "I understand," Halloran said. "Fear makes people reckless. It is not the first time we have seen it, and it will not be the last. I only ask that you understand clearly what happened out there. We did not choose to show you our teeth. Your officer reached for us, and we answered with the smallest thing that would stop him, and we left his ship and his crew unharmed. I hope that restraint speaks as loudly as anything I could stand here and say." Several delegates exchanged looks, and a new understanding passed between them. A power that could switch off an armed warship without a shot, and chose to do that rather than burn it out of the sky, was a power that valued restraint even while it held everything. That single fact settled something in the room. The raw fear that had opened the session was becoming something more complicated and much harder to dismiss. Scythos rose once more, slow and grave. "Captain Halloran, may I ask you a thing directly?" "Of course. You have shown us today both the size of the threat you once faced, and the care with which you carry the power you built to face it. So I am left curious. Now that you have shown yourselves to us fully, what is it you hope to gain from this assembly?" Halloran was quiet a moment before she answered, and when she did, her voice was low enough that the whole chamber leaned in to catch it. "We do not want conquest, Elder," she said. "We have no use for your worlds or your resources or your governments. What we want is smaller than that, and perhaps harder to give. We want to be understood. We want a place at this table, not because you are afraid of us, but because you have decided we belong at it. We would share what we learned fighting the Hollowing, in case it, or something like it, ever comes for your homes. And in return we ask one thing only, that Earth and its people no longer be filed as a footnote, easily dismissed, easily overlooked." She paused. "We have paid, I think, for the right to be taken seriously." There it was again, that old phrase, the one the Assembly's own records had used, and half the room felt the sting of it land, because it was their own word handed gently back to them. The chamber sat with it a long moment. "I believe," Thessacol said at last, "that this assembly owes you far more than being taken seriously. Captain Halloran, what you have carried into this room changes not only how we must think of your people, but how we must think of the dark inside our own borders. I propose we adjourn and reconvene tomorrow to open a formal path forward, one that welcomes Earth not as an observer, but as a full and respected member of this body." A murmur of agreement moved through the tiers, not without a few wary voices still counseling slowness, but the weight of the room had shifted, fear giving way, slowly, to something that looked almost like hope, and Mira Halloran allowed herself a small, real smile, the first honest thing her face had shown in all those hours, and thanked the speaker, and said that would be a good place to begin. The next day the chamber filled again, and the mood in it was a different creature entirely. Word of Skarn's honor had run through every level of assembly space overnight, alongside the account of the Hollowing and of humanity's long, bleeding road out of it. Most delegates arrived with their minds already turning, and the debate that followed ran hot. But it was no longer driven by panic. It ran for the better part of a day. The Lumen Fellowship counseled patience, a slow season of watching before any alliance was written. "We are moved by fear into speed," Elder Miralun warned the chamber. "The same fear that yesterday moved us toward the first blow. I do not distrust the humans. I distrust ourselves when we are frightened, and we are still frightened, and a frightened body signs things it should have read twice." "With respect to the Elder," answered Vesic, and the Keth delegate rose fully this time. "We have already read it twice. We read it when a warship went dark at their border and came home without a scratch. We read it again when their captain stood on that dais and told us where a moon-eater might be sleeping in our own dark. a thing she owed us nothing to share. Caution is a fine instrument, Elder, but there is a kind of caution that is only cowardice wearing better clothes.
If we make these people wait in our doorway for a decade while we watch them for a knife they have already declined 3 times to draw, we will not have been careful. We will have been rude to the only friends in this galaxy who know what is out there. He paused, and I, for one, would like them to still be feeling friendly the day we need them. Others, sobered by what had nearly happened at Farwatch, argued the same, eager to earn the goodwill of a people who had just shown both overwhelming strength and the discipline to hold it in check. It was Grozan who surprised the room. The Draska delegate, still stinging from Dune's disgrace, rose and asked to be heard, and when the chamber gave him the floor, he stood a moment in silence before he spoke. "We very nearly began a war through our own fear," he said, "and our own pride. The humans could have burned our ship out of the void, and every being here knows it. Instead, they turned it off and gave it back, and they warned us where they could have punished us. I have spent my life believing that strength is the willingness to strike first. I am an old fool, and I have learned something late." He paused, and his next words came slowly. "I would far rather have such a people at my side than face them as an enemy I made with my own hands. We called them young. We called them weak. We called them a footnote, easily overlooked. I would like the record to show that a footnote reached across our whole border and switched off one of our warships without spilling a drop of blood, and then asked us politely to be its friend." He sat. The room was very quiet. Halloran sat through most of the debate, answering when she was asked, otherwise only listening, while the assembly worked its own slow way through fear and pride and the discomfort of meeting a people who had grown far past what anyone expected of them. And when at last the final vote was called, it passed by a margin that was not even close. Earth, once filed at the lowest priority and left to fend for itself, was granted full membership in the Assembly of Sovereign Worlds, together with a seat of honor, in recognition of the warning it had carried across the dark to a body that had done nothing to earn it. It was 3 days after the vote that Seth Ravoon learned the last thing, and it was the thing that kept her awake longest of all. A deep picket, one of the long-range listening buoys the Assembly had scattered through the sable expanse generations ago and mostly forgotten, sent home a routine packet no one would ordinarily have read. A junior analyst read it because everything touching the human ship was being read now, twice, by nervous people. Buried in the noise was a set of gravitational shadows, faint and old from the days just before the Undaunted first appeared. Sethra took the data to the humans herself, and she asked Cade's superior, a quiet officer named Reyes, to help her understand what she was looking at. Reyes looked at it for a while, and then, without any drama at all, told her the truth. "Undaunted did not come alone," she said. "She came first. There were 3 more inside a light day of the border when she made contact. There were 7 behind them. The full 11 were never more than a few hours out. The whole time, your assembly was deciding whether to fire on us." She said it the way a person reports the weather. "We were not gambling, Warden. We do not gamble with our people that way. Not anymore." Captain Halloran walked into a room full of frightened strangers because she had a wall at her back the entire time. "You only ever saw the one ship. You were never looking at one ship." Sethra thought of the emergency session, of Grozan on his feet demanding the combined fleet, of the great confident icons of assembly warships, rendered beside the human hull for scale. She thought of how close the chamber had come to voting for the first blow, and of the 10 silent mountains that had been waiting, patient as the first, just past the edge of every sensor she owned, to answer it. "You would have let us learn that, only if we had made you show us," she said. "Yes," Reyes said, "that is rather the whole idea of a wall. The best day of its life is the day it never has to be more than a wall." She almost smiled. "You did not make us show you. Your assembly should be proud of that." Most of the rooms Halloran has walked into over the years did not manage it. Sethra carried that number home with her, and she never spoke it aloud in a public session, because she understood that some truths are only frightening if you say them in a place
large enough to echo. But she carried it. One ship at the door, 11 behind it, and behind the 11, a whole young, ferocious people who had taught themselves over 40 years of grief exactly how many walls a thing must have before it can afford to be gentle. In the weeks that followed, the bond between Earth and the wider dark took a shape that surprised nearly everyone who watched it form. Humanity did not push into assembly politics. It did not reach for new territory, the way more than a few anxious delegates had quietly feared it might the moment the doors were opened. Instead, the humans bent almost all of their weight toward defense, sharing the thin, hard-won store of data they held on the hollowing and working shoulder to shoulder with assembly scientists to build detection nets that might one day catch a thing like it while there was still time to run or stand. Cavril Dune asked to see Captain Halloran before she left Coradine. It surprised the people around him. A disgraced commander, stripped of his ship, had no standing to ask anything of anyone, least of all the human who had unmade his career from a chamber a system away. But Halloran agreed at once, and they met in a small side room, without cameras, without aides, an old Draska soldier and the small, calm woman who had switched off his war. For a while, he did not speak. Then he asked the only thing he had come to ask. "Why did you not destroy my ship?" Halloran looked at him a long moment. "Because you were not a threat to us," she said. "You were only afraid and armed and too proud to be either quietly. I have been all three. Most people who ever picked up a weapon have been. Killing you would have cost me nothing and taught your people the wrong lesson, that we are exactly what they feared. I would rather they learned the true one." "And what is the true one?" Dune said, and there was no anger left in him, only a tired kind of wanting to understand. "That a thing can be dangerous without being your enemy," she said. "Fire will burn your house to the ground, or it will keep your family alive through the longest night of the year. It is the same fire. What it becomes depends entirely on the hands around it, and on whether those hands are afraid. We spent 7 years being afraid of a thing that could not be reasoned with. I promised myself I would not spend the rest of my life being that thing to anyone else." She held out her hand, that small human gesture, palm bare, no weapon in it. Dune looked at it for a moment, not understanding it. And then slowly, he pressed his own broad hand, flat against hers, the way she seemed to want. And something in the old soldier eased that had been clenched tight since the day his bridge went dark. Some weeks after, Seth Ravune, still keeping her watch at Farwatch, received an invitation she had never once imagined she would hold. She was asked aboard the Undaunted itself as part of a joint research effort between assembly scientists and their human counterparts. She walked corridors wide enough to swallow whole districts of her home city, and she marveled, not only at the scale of what human hands had raised, but at the surprising smallness of the people who lived inside it. Humans who joked. Humans who complained about long shifts and thin rations. Humans who ate their meals crowded together and argued about nothing. Exactly like every other people she had ever known. A young engineer named Cade was assigned to walk her through the ship. "It is a strange thing," she said to him, standing in a bay tall enough to hold a moon of her own world's making, "that a people who can build this still worries whether the food in the galley is any good." Cade laughed. "That is sort of the whole point, honestly." She turned her 4 eyes on him. "We built all of this," he said, "because we did not want to lose the small stuff. The meals, the stupid arguments, the boring days where nothing happens at all." His voice changed, just a little. "I grew up hearing about a place called Harrow's Reach, a mining settlement out on one of our moons. My grandmother lived there. It was the first thing the hollowing took, before we even understood what it was. There is a room in my family's records, a table set for a meal from the last message anyone sent out. Nobody ever came home to eat it." He said it plainly, without weight, the way humans seem to say the worst things. "So everything we build now," he said, "we build to protect the ordinary, not the grand things, the small ones, the table with the food still on it. That is the whole reason for the wall." Seth Ravune stood with that for a long time, and no sensor reading she had ever taken in all her long career of studying dangers. had told her as much about the humans as that one quiet sentence did. She went back to Farwatch after that, back to the quiet grave at the lip of the expanse, and she took up her watch again, and on the surface, almost nothing had changed. The same drifting stone, the same dead comets, the same slow turning of the same indifferent suns. But it did not feel like a punishment anymore, and it did not feel like a grave. She had spent a whole career watching an empty dark for a danger she never really believed would come, and it had come, and it had turned out to be a small, calm woman in a plain, dark uniform who kept her word. Sethra found she watched differently now, not for the blow she had always half expected, for the next thing that might need meeting the way the humans had taught them to meet the first, with open sensors and steady hands and, if it could possibly be managed, without a single drop of blood. And far out at the edge of the system, and far beyond it, across 100 quiet stretches of dark where human ships now stood their watch alongside assembly vessels in a young and growing peace, the age of humanity's long isolation came, at last, to its end. What had begun in panic, with one silent mountain of a ship arriving unannounced at the border of the known, had become something none of them could have named that first violet morning. The beginning of a galaxy learning together how to stand against whatever dark might still be drifting between its stars, because somewhere out there it was still drifting. Patient, unseen, the hollowing, wounded, but never destroyed. A slow reminder that the peace humanity had bled so hard to build had never once been promised to anyone. But for the first time in a very long while, when the beings of the assembly looked out into that dark and let themselves feel afraid, they found they were not looking into it alone. 38 kilometers of quiet, patient power kept its place at the edge of the system, and 10 more like her stood watch across the reach of settled space, and they did not move, and they did not sleep, and they were not afraid. They only waited, the way a wall waits, for the night that might never come. And if it came, this time, no one would face it by themselves.